So, Mushtaq, it's time for our weekly conversation. It's great to
It
see you
is.
again.
Pleasure. Good to see you. Thank you.
And I so enjoyed our last conversation. And as we have our discussions around how one navigates in a mapless world and the relationship between map readers and map makers, our starting point, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's our finishing point, was that we were interested in education and in leadership, and I guess also in educating future leaders.
That's right.
So if we think about leading and learning in a mapless world, which is the brand that we seem to be settling on for our conversations, I wondered if today we could just talk to each other about one story about leadership and one story about learning. And I was going to invite you to start by telling us a story about your experiences, recent or not so recent, of educating and learning in a mapless world.
Well, this is a very interesting thing that you asked me this question, Robert, because there's something happened today that I was meant to share with you, or the climax of it happened today. So a couple of weeks ago, I received an email from a parent of one of the students who study at the university. Of course, I won't mention any names or even the school they are in. And the parent was narrating to me a situation where basically his child was accused of plagiarism. And he was saying that this is very unfair, and definitely the academic staff made a mistake, and the child is having almost like a mental meltdown because they never had to be accused of such an offense. So of course, I just forwarded it to the related academics, and they were taking care of it, taking care of the student as well while this being investigated. So just so happened today, I was going out of my office, and there were an academic staff and another gentleman whom I thought was one of our PhD students. We were just having a chat, and then I just said hello, and then my colleague, the academic staff, said, "Mushtaq, can you please come in, because let me introduce you to Mr. So-and-so. He's a gentleman who wrote to you about the situation with their child." So I started a conversation with him, and he was telling me, I really just don't know what was happening, and basically his child has written a report, and at the end of the report they put the references, but these references did not exist. And for us, as you know, this is a telltale of using AI that hallucinated references that look very legitimate, but actually when you go and check them, there's no such paper, maybe there's no such journal even. And he was still, I think first a lot of faith in the child of his, but at the same time, I think because he was like pushing the university for so long, it's very difficult for him to retract his claim that this is not true. And he was saying, we paid the university quite a bit of money to educate our children, and you guys are still, accusing them of committing such an offense which we have never done, and things like that. Anyway, so I said, look, there's something called hallucination, and this happens when people use AI to write a report and they don't check. Now, we encourage our students to use AI, but they need to check, they need to verify, they need to eventually accept that this work is going in their name. And I then told him about a recent case that made the news in Australia, where very famous consultancy company, Deloitte, actually, this is all now in the public domain, where they were contracted by the Australian government to write a report about something. And clearly they use some form of AI, because there's quite a bit of hallucination within the report, which was not discovered immediately, but later when it was discovered, as you could imagine, was quite a scandal. So I was actually telling the father, I said, look, we need to prepare your child to be able to work and operate in such a world where the allure of using AI to do the work is high, because the quality that comes is very convincing, and for the human mind to remain rigorous enough to say, I'll check this, I'll check it line by line, I'll make sure every claim that was made is something that I could stand behind, and so on, would be the key requirement for leading and for working and for having a gainful employment. So this was, to me, as a sign of like a very rapid change that is happening, where sometimes our academic colleagues, when they mark reports, they are like not sure whether this was done by the students or it was done by AI. And the notion of learning and actually learning through writing, which is something you and I do quite a lot. We enjoy, we struggle with, but that struggle is what anchors thing into our mind, and also gives us that sense of achievement and fulfillment. All these things are, I think, are being challenged. So this was quite an interesting thing that just happened today, and I thought of sharing that with you.
So if you think about that in relation to Mapless settings, there's a few different things I take from that story. First of all, indignation. As an academic, you think how outrageous that someone could cheat and use AI. Of course, that's a particular framing, isn't it? Because there's no more cheating than using a calculator rather than working things out on paper. But it does. So it calls into question the ability to fact check. And of course, in today's world, fact checking is increasingly important because even the news, you're not sure how true is this version of the story. So had this student used AI to help craft a report but check the validity of each of the references, in some ways that might have been good practice because it's much more efficient and they are still the author and the owner of the integrity of the work. So fact checking is one. Funding is another, because I hear in the parents' indignation that I paid for this education, how dare you accuse my beloved son or daughter of cheating. There's something about the expectations of, as education has been commercialized, it is a proposition, but
Yeah.
I think in universities we all struggle a bit with this idea of whether these are customers or students. And of course, if you treat them entirely as customers, there's some kind of money back guarantee. And
Yes.
I find myself, as I get older, I find myself more and more indignant in relation to student conversations where they say, you failed me. So what was it about your inadequate teaching that failed me? I might say in response, well, what was it about your lack of time and energy and enthusiasm for the subject that has failed you? So there's something about funding. And then there's something also, I think, about outlook and purpose. Like, so the safe space, because in your version of this story, this student learns a difficult life lesson, but they learn it in the safe environment of a university assignment, not in a situation where they could be charged and convicted for a criminal offence for misrepresenting information or for fraud. So there's lots going on in that example or that story about the changing nature of the technology that enables learning and what is it that you are learning. Because if you only read the learning as your ability to write the assignment versus if you express the learning as how to use the technology to help you produce the artifact versus if you frame it as how to learn the moral obligations about things that you claim intellectual property for versus things that you don't. And just as a
So
reciprocal story, when I joined iUniversity, and I won't say which one, when I joined iUniversity, one of the first things that came across my desk was a complaint letter from somebody who didn't work for the university. And I had to read it and reread it a few times to make sure I had fully understood it. But it was saying, Dear Professor Alatabi, I am outraged that one of your students that used my services to write an essay for them has not paid his bill. Could you please attend to this?
wow, that's very interesting, really. I mean, even more interesting than my AI related story, isn't it?
Yeah. And so you've
Yeah.
got somebody who's provided a service who feels angry with one of our students for not paying their bill. And so they've attempted to cheat. They probably have cheated. Whether they were caught or not, that's a different part of the story. But the idea that the provider, the supplier, is annoyed with the university for not living up to its values and making sure that the supply chain is satisfied.
But this is very interesting. If someone doing something that is, borders on the criminal or maybe is criminal, of like selling these essays, and then wants to use the legal frameworks of the society to claim what they consider as their right, which is very, very interesting, isn't it?
It's definitely the case that I think that in the latter part of my academic career, I come across behaviours which I just cannot really square with the early part of my academic career when I was a student. And so if we reflect back on our earlier conversation, because we had a great conversation about our learning journey from first levels of education through high school, through university, on to working in universities. But the expectations of what the responsibility of the learner were and what the responsibility of the educator were do seem to be changing.
You're right, and I think actually, if we were to maybe just take this to the next level as a conversation, the world has always been changing, but I think the rate of change has definitely accelerated. In no time, within a couple of years, the strength and the capability of the tools that are available to be used to learn better or to cheat are, the levels are accelerating to quite a dramatic deal. So maybe the question that I would ask you, if someone asks you, they are starting the journey, what would be the skills that they will need to develop so that they will be able to be productive, be employable? Even, I don't know whether even the term employability is the right thing or the right framing, but literally we are in this mapless world. Gone the days where you say, if you get a degree in engineering or accounting or law, even if you don't like what you do, you are sort of assured a job that will pay the bills. I think we are really moving into that space where, depending on the maps that we are going to collectively create, we could potentially have a utopian world, or it could become dystopian. Most likely it will be somewhere in between, but the more we can frame things positively, I think the better. So the question to you is, what would be the skills that people need to focus on and hone in them?
So we both like ideas and researchers and thinkers, and I particularly like quotes. So I'm going to answer with a quote from somebody who is a very profound thinker, and definitely in our language, a map maker, not a map reader, and that's Charles Darwin. And so Charles Darwin has a nice quote, which is, "It's not the fittest of the species that survives," because he's often slightly misattributed with this idea of survival of the fittest. He says it's not the fittest of the species that survive, but those most responsive to change. And so I translate that quote into the context of, should I do an engineering or a law degree or a medical degree? Or I would say it doesn't matter whether you're the best engineer, the fittest of the engineers. It matters more whether you can adapt your engineering skills to the changing landscape, given the pace at which the landscape is changing these days. And so that resilience through adaptation, I think, is probably the key thing that I would focus on. And that, so what does that actually mean in practice? What it actually means in practice, I think, is focusing less on the excellence of the grade that you get. So did I get 100% in the test about thermodynamics or whatever it was that I was studying? And slightly more on, how do I internalize and adapt and change that? And so emotively, that is a willingness to go from being really good at something to being less good at something, but learning. So that learning is a really interesting experience, I think, because for me, if I only reflect on my lived experience of it, it's discombobulating, because what I like best is being good at things, and what I like least is being not good at things. And yet learning is the transition from one to the other. So once you've mastered something, the willingness to unlearn or to relearn is actually really emotionally challenging. So that responsiveness to change from Charles Darwin, that is, I think, about the emotional willingness to go to be worse at something for a while whilst you reinvent or reapply in a new context and continue to learn.
I agree with you, and probably just to sort of dive deeper, I think what makes us willing to learn or even enjoying learning is having a clear sense of purpose. So when we do things because we believe in them and they are aligned with the things that we believe in, then our willingness to learn really increases. I could actually reflect on my experience doing this. As you know, I'm doing the editing for these episodes. And in the beginning, I really struggled to find a way to cut the video at the exact moment that I need. So I checked the AI, and eventually I actually discovered how to do it, which was very simple. Again, but I really put a lot of effort. So I was trying to use shortcuts where AI gives me a way to do it, but then it ends at either slightly before, slightly after, and then it wasn't beautiful. And then on this platform that we are using, all I needed is to actually put the cursor right where I want it, and I click the letter S for split, and that will actually produce two videos. I could just delete the last bit. So But reflecting on that, I haven't needed actually to do these kind of things, just because we are doing this in our personal capacity. So we're not using any resources from the university. And usually I would just tell people, make me a video, do it like this, do it like that, and then they will do it. But actually having to learn it myself, I felt, without me really wanting this to be, as close to perfect in terms of its beginning and end to what I would have not put that effort. But then you learn because you like it, and then you learn, and then you enjoy what you produce. So I think that sense of purpose and knowing why you want to do certain things will be, to my mind, such an important thing, because it will lead to that adaptability and resilience. So this is how I see that. Maybe if someone asked me, what should I learn? What if, and they were to ask me for one word, I would just say purpose. Find your purpose, because once you know it, I think the rest is easier.
So I'm going to lay a little seed that might come back to us in episodes to follow, which is as we head towards our 100th episode, I'm going to wonder whether something else will be available to you, but you'll find yourself saying, but I just press S. I know how to do that. I really like just pressing S.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that process of becoming really competent at something and it becoming really familiar, and then that familiarity producing an emotional response, which is, but I like it. And I've had that so many times in my working experience of knowing how to do something and then gradually, slightly resentfully discovering that you could do it much quicker if you just did this.
Yes. You are right, and actually the more effort I put, I was able to to change the views. I could flip from having like two of us speaking to one speaking and the other person speaking. So you get to learn, and I think. But the key thing is, I'm reflecting. If I did not want to do this, there's no way I would have learned it. I would have found a million excuses to say, I'm too busy. There's no way I'm going to do that. And anyway, it will not be as good as something that's done by professionals. So I really feel that this is the element that leaders and educators and parents should really focus on, because there will be a day where even the editing will be done entirely by AI, better than us. I mean, I can just see this happening. But
So you've told us a story about learning, and I'm going to tell you two very short stories about leading that are in this context because you've made me think of them. And as you know, I collect these stories. So that sense of purpose is really important. And we've talked a little bit about the rate of change. And so I was at a talk a couple of years ago when I worked at a different university, which was a talk run by not the university, it was the Institute of Directors, I think, or someone like that. And there was a very, very successful entrepreneur who'd founded a .com business that you would know. She was talking about the fact that she had young children who were still at school, so not high school. I think they were maybe 9 or 10 or 11 would be my guess. And she was talking about the potential disruption and acceleration that quantum computing will bring as a tech entrepreneur. And I found this really interesting because this is someone who has a degree of credibility and knowledge in that space. And she said, every morning when I'm making breakfast with my children, I say, enjoy today. It'll be the slowest day of the rest of your life. So that's a really interesting way of framing their experience of the day. A week from now, things will be a bit faster. A year from now, they'll be unbelievably faster. 3 years from now, you won't believe how slow it used to be. And when I think about the rate of change, I often hear myself using the phrase life in dog years. My time in this job, I've been in this job for a year and a half, and I often express that has felt like life in dog years because so much has happened in such a short period of time. But just imagine if this is actually quite slow. The kind of learning using AI in the student story you told, or using AI to help you learn how to edit a video file. What if that is just ridiculously slow compared to what quantum computing can do to you? So there's something about expectations of pace.
Yes.
And in the second story, from a different university and a bit longer ago, from an entrepreneur who founded a very successful business with a group of his friends. So his group of friends used to work in an industry which had failed, and so they'd all lost their jobs at the same time, and they started a new business doing something completely different, and that new business was wildly successful. Not immediately, but eventually wildly successful. And so this successful business leader was coming to talk to our MBA students at the university, and he brought with him a picture of him receiving a global award from a very large multinational company for this business that they'd started in Scotland. And, tremendously proud of this amazing achievement and recognition. And he came back to his leadership team, his friends who'd co-founded the business with, and the other people they'd hired since. And he put this global award in the middle of the boardroom. And he spoke in a very Scottish way and said, "I said to my colleagues, that's amazing, isn't it?" And they were all just very proud, very proud. And then he said, "Just imagine how good we could be if we weren't still rubbish at so many things."
Right.
And I think his purpose in life was about self-improvement and restlessness and a relentlessness about, doesn't matter that this is amazing, let's see what we could do next. Both of those things kind of chime with your story about the rate of change and the way in which we learn and our purpose in learning.
Yeah, I think the other element. I mean, you're absolutely right. And the other element that I wanted to just reflect on for a bit, the importance of knowing yourself and knowing your purpose is not something new. This is something that we have known for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, last week I was in China speaking at a conference. Actually, I stood and I said, first, I just want to have a disclaimer at the beginning. I have nothing new to teach you that you don't already know. Everything that I'm going to say, whether you like it or not, at the end of my talk, you will, when you reflect on it, you already know it. And I talk about the importance of purpose. Of course, I put stories and I share videos from my students and so on. And the reflection I want us to do is, although we all know that this is important, sometimes like cognitively or intellectually, it's not easy for a parent to tell their son or daughter, you know what, it's not very important for you to be very good at engineering as long as you are finding your purpose and you are able to do the things that you need to do, because there will be all that world of change. Parents still say, please go there, get the best mark that you do. And there's not necessarily a conflict between getting the mark and getting and knowing about the purpose. But I think without the primacy of purpose, getting the mark could easily be done using AI, taking shortcuts, choosing to produce the work without really learning and things like that. So how do we deal with this, Robert, at a time where I honestly feel humanity is naked? If you don't know your purpose, the machine will do the cognitive bits better than you. So how do you think we handle this and work with it?
So I think that is about trying to have the honesty and the patience to tell people to slow down in a very fast-moving environment.
Mm.
And so you're right to say that for all of the history of humanity, great thinkers have told us about the importance of purpose and integrity. And, these are not new lessons in life, but maybe you and I are in the fortunate position that over millennia, what we've managed to do is forget regularly enough so that these new ideas seem new enough.
Mm.
But I think they continue to be really important ideas. And there's something about time frame. For the strategy scholar in me, it's the relationship between what am I going to do today and tomorrow,
Mm.
where do I want to be in the medium term, and how is this guiding me towards what I ultimately want? And what happens when you do, I think I've said in an earlier version of this conversation, there's a relationship between strategy, which we apply very easily to organizations or brands or companies, but we find difficult to apply to ourselves.
Mm.
So when we think about a strategy for us, we have to think, what is our very long-term goal here? And that is about purpose.
Yes.
And if you can think about experience in the short term through the filter of that longer-term goal, suddenly things which seem disastrous today seem maybe an opportunity to grow or turn or change tomorrow. Suddenly things which seem really important today are less important. And so that relationship, which we were talking about a moment ago, about how to learn to edit a video file, and then that becoming a habit, and then that becoming ingrained, and then that becoming something that you're not really willing to change. The way to approach that, I think, is to have this very long-term view about the sequence of times in your life where you have developed habits that you have then outgrown, and how you notice the process of outgrowing them.
I agree with you. And I think our role as teachers, academics, parents, leaders, role models, friends would continue to be as map makers, if we were to use our language. Because again, on my reflecting on my experience at this conference in Chengdu in China, many of the academics were actually struggling with AI and cheating with AI and things like that. And they asked me about this. So I actually told them, from time to time, some of these old videos of someone has put a camera in London or New York or somewhere some 100 years ago and created some footage. And then this footage has disappeared and suddenly these things appear. And then it gives you like a glimpse of how did life look like back then. And often it's really striking how fit people were, generally speaking. And that was something to be expected because back then, people walked, people climbed stairs. We did not have the technology to do the physical work on our behalf. Of course, for a while, when we started to have escalators and lifts and cars and so on, for a while it sounded like this technology is fantastic. Now we don't have to do anything, and that's when we realized when we get less fit and a bit obese and so on, we started to understand that actually this work is necessary. And then we went and now people pay money to just go to a gym. I wager 150 years ago, if someone has a business model to say, I open a gym where someone will come and just runs. People say, why would I do this? I run anyway, or I walk anyway. So I'm sort of predicting that while the eye, may be quite appealing as to take some shortcuts, we will realize that this will have an impact on thinking. And actually, there are some research that is emerging that people are becoming less critical thinkers if they just simply put something in AI and then just produce it and say, that's it, it's good. Let it write my email, let it write my report. And I think we will then have that discipline to choose to first think and then maybe do the AI. And that will, of course, will be slower than just getting the AI to do it. But before we can endorse it, or as you earlier said, claim it from an intellectual property as something that we've done it, we need at least to read it, check it, fact check it, make sure that's exactly what we mean, and so on. And I think that notion of having the discipline to slow down and humanize things will become a requirement and will become a key skill. And sometimes people were like nodding as I gave that example, which is not necessarily a very original one, but some of them, they haven't really thought about it in that way. And I think to help people to find ways to see the world is in a way map making. So I think this map making is such an important thing because the world is, as we trying to say, is the maps are running out and we are having the unmapped or the mapless territory that we are operating within.
So for a future conversation as we close, I think that what's the phrase you used there that really resonates with me is the work. So what is the work? And I like screenwriters and authors and musicians and people who do amazing creative things. And the ones that I'm most fond of or most impressed by often talk about. So instead of just seeing the finished movie or the finished play or the finished piece of music, what they talk about is the work, which is in a studio on their own, grafting away. And so what is the equivalent of the manual labor in an AI-enabled world? What is that work? And sometimes maybe it is just the patient stillness and critical application of your own mind to something that somebody else has subcontracted.
So Robert, as we close, we try to link this back to our students or to something that we could share with a young person. I just wanted to check with you that while if you go 5 years ago, 5 years for today, and you ask the World Economic Forum, what are the skills that young people should learn to be productive? They have, 12 or 15 lists. It starts by coding, moves to I don't know what. There are multiple things. But now what we are saying, you know what, you need to be adaptable and agile, and potentially when you know about yourself, you know your value and you know your purpose, then the rest is, is okay. You will figure it out. We don't want to give you a long list, but we want to give you this because there is an innate value in being human, and we should double down on that rather than we see the human value as someone who can do coding or do software or do engineering or design heat exchangers or write reports or whatever. So we are actually going into one or two things to be done so that we are able to be agile in a world that will continue to change, and to be able to read the latest maps that people create and make sure that you're looking at the right map. So it's not a map of a different country or a different mountainous area, but also to be able to contribute your own sort of addition to the map or version of the map. Did I capture what we wanted to say?
Yeah. And that generates a level of resilience because there's a self-confidence that comes from knowing you don't need anybody else to help you.
Brilliant. Fantastic conversation as usual, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.